Good morning. I'm going to ask everyone a question. That will determine how long I speak. That is, can you raise your hand if you were here last night? Okay, you get to hear much less of me than you did last night. I'm going to assume that you all remember what I said about who was participating in this, but I will remind you. That is a joint project undertaken under the support from the Mellon Foundation through the Purdue University Libraries and Press, the College of Liberal Arts, the Global Policy Research Institute, and Discovery Park. And I'm Jim Mullins, the Dean of Libraries here at Purdue. I'm going to, therefore, I'm going to pass over the discussion about what we were doing in the way of looking at the grand challenges from the perspective, or the world's grand challenges, from the perspective of combining humanities, social sciences, and STEM disciplines, along with the role and responsibilities of library faculty in these projects, to really come down to looking at what we are hoping to accomplish and what we think that this will lead to in the future. Now, we have one excellent example of Purdue taking this initiative in developing the Systems Collaboratory, which had its launch about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that is really looking at how to bring together the sciences, engineering, and the humanities, social sciences. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to be aware that this is a movement that's not only being facilitated by the Mellon Grant that we have received and is supporting this conference, but also the fact that Purdue University has made this commitment to looking at how can we really bring together interdisciplinary research in a very significant way to advance and finding solutions for the challenges that our world knows. So with that, I'm going to move to invite our representative from the Mellon Foundation, Kristen Radeternathoran. She'll pronounce her name much better than I can. And if I look at her name tag, I can do it very well because it's pronounced exactly the way it is spelled. So, Kristen?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me here today. Everyone at Mellon is really excited about this project. And I don't know how familiar everyone is with the Mellon Foundation, but we generally make grants in the arts and the humanities. So we were really excited about the collaboration between the STEM fields and the arts and the humanities fields here in this project. A little about me, I'm from the Scholarly Communications program, and we generally make grants to libraries, archives, presses for preserving and making accessible the scholarly record. So if you have any questions for me throughout the day, please feel free to find me. And I just wanted to say thanks so much. I'm learning a lot already. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. When we received this grant from the Mellon Foundation, we had a different cast of characters working as the principal and co-PIs. Initially, the lead PI for this was Charles Watkinson, who was the director of the press. And Charles left us soon after we received this award. So unfortunately, I had to step in. Unfortunately, because I couldn't do the job as well as Charles could. And then we have 3 other co-PIs who are representing the different partners. And we have with us today, I think only one of those, Candace Vibert. Candace, where are you? Candace represented the Discovery Park. And we had Hooni Cho representing the College of Liberal Arts. And let's see, who am I forgetting? Oh, Dan Hurlman is representing the Global Policy Research Institute on behalf of Suresh Garamella, who is one of the co-PIs. So with that, I'm going to turn to our first, let me, before we start, do we have any questions from the participants that I can answer at this point? Okay. Well, we're going to be hearing from our 5 teams. Just to remind you, the grant that we received from the Mellon Foundation was to be re-granted to various teams who were working who presented submissions of projects. And as I mentioned last night, we had 14 submissions. We had a review panel that represented scholars from around the university, but also around the country, who could help us assess and evaluate the strength of the proposals and the appropriateness to the topic. And we selected 5 of the proposals. Obviously, we had the resources to be able to support 6, but we made the decision that the break-off between the 5th and the 6th was a little bit greater than we felt comfortable with. So we funded the 5 projects, and we gave them the opportunity to work collaboratively, but ultimately to come up with a policy statement that would have to be distributed or would be distributed to agencies that could inform them about options in being able to address a grand challenge. The teams then have not only worked collaboratively with each other, they have worked and returned with meetings or joint meetings with us and also with our consultant from the Brookings Institution Press, Bob Faraday, who came in and helped them develop avenues for the dissemination of their research and also the development of policy statements. So this has been a project that started a year ago, and we're about halfway through. We'll finish in July of next year. So we have our 5 teams, and I think you'll find that there are 5 very interesting and not necessarily complementary projects. They're complementary in the fact that they're all addressing and moving us forward in addressing a grand challenge, but they aren't necessarily ones that you can see direct linkages to. And someone asked me the other day, is it supposed to be that these projects all relate to each other? And I thought, well, 2 of them deal with waste, but not necessarily in the same way. So you can say there are similarities, but obviously, once you hear the projects, you're going to understand that they're probably not that directly connected. So with that as a preamble, I'm going to turn to our first presenter, which is Local and Global Perspectives on E-Waste, Integrating the Humanities, Social Science, and Engineering to Examine the Life Cycle of Electronics, Corey Cooper. Corey? And we'll have time, we hope, for 1 or 2 questions after each presentation. And if we move through these all on our schedule, we should have time then that we can come back and raise questions with the team members as a whole. Thank you. Corey?
Thank you. Good morning. Hearing the project title spoken out loud is a good reminder of why we did this very quickly and rebranded the project in a way that represents what we're doing but is easier to talk about with the general public. And this title will have rebranding of our project will make additional sense as I move along here. So these are all of the members of our team listed in alphabetical order. This list includes the original 8 co-PIs, 1 graduate student, 7 undergrads who are either currently working or have worked on the project, and our private contractor consultant videographer who has a small video production company here locally, but who is, of course, a Purdue communications graduate. So I got interested in the topic of e-waste about 5 or 6 years ago and began collaborating with Professor Carol Handwerker in materials engineering and Professor Fu Zhao in mechanical engineering. And we developed some small projects, I guess, pilot studies, working with undergrads on some different issues related to e-waste. The first one was actually funded by Electronics Take Back Coalition, or the TIDE Center. looking at flat panel television screens, and that this is an upcoming problem, that a lot of these things will soon be discarded, and there's no good way to disassemble them or recycle them. And so we began to look at these sorts of things, just the three of us. So like I said, that was about 5 or 6 years ago. And then when this grant proposal came along, it seemed like a really good opportunity to boost the social science side of this collaborative activity and try to get more information on electronic use, which is what I've been saying sort of all along, is that we need more information about what people are doing with electronics, especially what they're doing when they're through with them. But this is our team here, and if I'm willing to pat myself on the back about anything, it's about having chosen very good people to work with on this project. So I'm going to move on now to, let me see here. I'm going to show a short explainer video. So this is one of our video products from the project that we've created. And that didn't work. I think I may have to have you cue it. There we go.
Millions of electronic devices are produced globally. It is estimated in 2009, 438 million electronic devices were sold in the US. That same year, 2.37 million tons of electronics were ready for end-of-life management, a 122% increase from the previous decade. And our electronic devices contain hazardous materials like mercury, lead, lithium, cadmium, hexavalent chromium, beryllium, brominated flame retardants, and polyvinyl chloride plastics. 89% of mobile devices were placed in U.S. landfills in 2010, making electronics one of the fastest growing segments of the waste stream. And they are not just toxic at the end of life, but at the beginning too. Electronic devices contain precious metals and rare earth elements that are energy intensive to mine and process. Neodymium is one of 4 rare earth elements that are used to make your phone vibrate. The mining of such rare earth elements releases radioactive tailings. E-waste is hazardous waste, and if not managed properly, these hazardous contaminants can negatively impact human health. Household e-waste is not just toxic, it is increasingly burdensome to manage. Many old and outdated electronic devices contain sensitive personal data. Life cycles and the e-waste problem in the Greater Lafayette area. To find out more about the Electronic Life Histories Project, our research findings, and more information on local e-waste management, visit our website at www.electroniclifehistoriesproject.com.
So this is our first draft of this concept of an explainer video that to sort of discuss the problem, and in different future versions at the end, of course, is where we will try to offer solutions to what is a very complex problem. So the problem summed up again here. It's rapid and just constant innovation in electronics coupled with reduced costs has resulted in millions upon millions of electronic devices, computers, cell phones, LCD televisions produced globally in just the last few years. And this rapid innovation and low cost also makes it relatively inexpensive to get rid of something and buy a new one. So another effect is these devices, in many cases, have very short use lives before they're discarded. As the video pointed out, electronic materials contain materials that are known to have serious negative impacts on human health. You stop using your cell phone and you put it in your drawer, it's not a problem. Millions of these enter the landfill, or millions of pounds of this are recycled in an unsafe manner, then you begin to have a problem. Because this is still a relatively new problem with respect to the magnitude, the exponential growth in electronic devices, there is currently insufficient infrastructure for dealing with the problem. Recycling in the U.S. is still not well established. There are only 25 U.S. states that have legislation dealing with e-waste, including Indiana, but Indiana's laws do not cover cell phones. State legislation is primarily geared toward helping the metals recycling industry, and that's not necessarily a criticism, that's just an observation that most of the law has to do with helping recover value from the metal from electronics. Previous attempts at legislating e-waste at the federal level in the United States have failed. So I myself am an anthropologist and archaeologist. Archaeologists are anthropologists who study the past. That's by looking at material remains. That's sort of the textbook definition. Archaeologists are essentially anthropologists who study past cultures, leaving what was left behind. I am a practitioner of a paradigm, behavioral archaeology, and behavioral archaeologists don't draw a distinct line between past and present in studying specifically technology and technological change. So behavioral archaeologists have written books and articles about electric cars, transistor radios, current dietary habits based on examining modern garbage disposal, and you know these kinds of modern issues. So within behavioral archaeology, the study of technology, it overlaps with studies in modern material culture. The diagram you see here, this is a fairly typical visual to discuss life cycle analysis. Life cycle analysis is used in engineering to look at the differential cost, economic cost, environmental costs of different sorts of processing, manufacturing practices. What archaeologists are most interested in, because archaeologists, have been using similar kinds of diagrams for a long time without any familiarity with the concept of life cycle analysis. Archaeologists are specifically interested in use and end of life because we start with the end product and try to work our way backwards. What this particular project is most interested in with respect to electronics, we're really focusing on use and end of life because this is part of life cycle analysis that it's just, this happens, things are used. There's a lot of detailed information about getting to that point and then some detailed information in some cases about what happens after, but we're really interested in use, the behaviors related to the use and disposal of electronics. So use and end of life are key in our project. But archaeologists also make use of this idea, behavior archaeologists especially, of, that got a little cut off. So this is a lithic artifact life history. Anthropologists and archaeologists use the concept of life history to characterize sort of an expected life course of a human being, or for archaeologists, an object in a particular cultural context. So this very busy diagram or schematic here is looking at stone tools. Stone tool assemblage, this is what archaeologists find, and then they try to figure out the rest. What are the decisions that go into raw material selection, and what's the decision making all along this particular process? So this isn't the only thing that we're doing in our project, but one of the things we're trying to do is I'm trying to combine these two ways of looking at technology, and this is one way we're trying to combine, synthesize engineering with other disciplines. These are the three main points from our original proposal, our research plan. So I'll go over each of these briefly. And I just want to point out that we have been approaching this as essentially a pilot study on which to build in the future. So we wanted to do an initial study, get some results, get a feel for, get a better feel for what the problem really is, better define the problem, and get, of course, some idea about how it could possibly be addressed. So we're looking at this over, we're sort of in it for the long haul, I guess. So the first point here, the original title, Global and Local. It is our local consumption and discard of electronics, us here, all these communities across the United States and Europe, that contribute to this global problem. So there won't be a one-size-fits-all solution, but there ought not to have to be, that doesn't really make sense. We shouldn't need millions of different solutions, one for each community. This article here is titled, How Much E-Waste Is There in U.S. Basements and Attics? Results from a National Survey. This is Sephoris et al. From 2009. They did a random survey of households in the U.S., 2,136 households, and found that each house, people are storing 4.1, an average of 4.1 small and 2.4 large e-waste items. So this is another thing that we're interested in, because with people, there's no infrastructure to manage e-waste, and so there are opportunities to do things with electronics you no longer use, but the infrastructure is lacking, and so it's relatively easy to just keep these things in your home. So they did this study, and their study that found that there's more in households than a previous EPA study found. And why this is important is it points out the need to develop infrastructure, that there's value out there for recyclers, but people have to, they have to actually recycle. So this article was a call for developing recycling infrastructure. What they didn't address at all is why. They're just, how much? And so what we're interested in this is taking this further. Why is this being kept in people's houses, and looking at the behavior of people's, just their storage, their use of electronic devices. And related to the title of this article, Ed Oscar Winsky, the manager there, told me while getting a tour, Oscar Winsky is a local metals recycling and electronics recycler. He said that his biggest competitor when it comes to e-waste recycling is attics, basements, and garages. So for us, Oscar Winsky is pretty much the only game in town. Okay, so the lit review is ongoing. This is so that we can place our research here within this global context. We developed a survey to begin to understand the life history of electronic devices, asking questions that give us an idea of how you track an object through its life course, particularly paying attention to after it's been purchased, or purchase, use, reuse, these kinds of things. So why and how do people store, discard, reuse, or recycle electronics? What are individual stakeholder attitudes, values, behaviors associated with electronics? We've interviewed over 10 individuals at this point to get at some of these issues in more depth. A number of people that participated in the survey, so citizens, local residents. We've also interviewed people who are involved with the e-waste stream currently, so local government, and recyclers, and additionally, Gideon Singer, a grad student who's studying e-waste here, attended a conference in Australia and was able to talk to people there, and so we have some interviews from Australia and some idea of how they're going about it. So that's another aspect of our global approach. And in the spring, we're going to be conducting some additional interactions, interviews, ethnographic work, participant observation. So a little bit about the survey. The survey has just closed, so I don't have a lot of data to report from the survey. This is why I was very happy to hear that the deadline for this was pushed back till July to give us a little more time. The survey contains 98 questions, and we sort of approached this with the idea that knowing that we might be sacrificing data quantity for data depth, but that's what we were going for, data depth. So 98 questions, 241 people began our survey, 115 completed, so a little less than half actually completed it. This is one of the postcard, oops, wrong one. Flyer that we made to advertise our survey, to let people know more about the project. And this is a map of showing the respondents. Most of the respondents are in these numbers I know are smaller, in the 47906 zip code and surrounding area. But we weren't attempting a random survey like that of Sepphoris at all. We were trying to get an idea of sort of the local e-waste landscape. So I know this may sound like a cop-out, but that's all you see for this slide. By the time we're done, I have no doubt we will have some very specific ideas of what we do next, and we're already generating ideas about what's needed, not just solutions, but additional research. So community engagement, this has been a big part of what we've been doing, because from the beginning, we focused on the need to engage with the community to better understand what they know about e-waste and the reuse and discard options. We set up a booth at the Wabash River Fest, 2 Lafayette Downtown Mosey's, and a Maker's Fair in Fort Wayne. At this booth, we displayed electronics and a junk drawer, and this was an idea developed by Professor McMullen in Visual and Performing Arts as a way to draw people in and get them to talk about it. So at this booth, you can see there is a drawer that's been pulled out of a desk with electronics in it. And people walk by and they sort of look over and they're like, hey, I have one of those. And I mean, just again and again and again. And this was a way to engage people, to talk about the problem, and get some information from them. What do they know? What do they currently do? And maybe this is a good time to point out that this isn't, the video is very good in sort of explaining what the problem is. It's an explainer video. We are not out to try to just alarm people and leave it at that, or shake our finger at people and, you're bad, that's wrong. As I tell people, people on the project have heard this many times. I live in a house with 3 flat screen LCD televisions. Only 3 people live in my house. One of them is 3 years old. I am part of the e-waste problem. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not an anti-technology person. These have been very informative, these opportunities to interact with the public. And right off the bat, we realized, well, we can't just tell people about this and leave them hanging. So at this booth, we would distribute the pamphlet from the county solid waste management district that discusses options for hazardous waste, including e-waste, and including, they mentioned Oscar Winsky as being one of the places where you can take your unwanted electronics. So we have a website. I won't bother connecting to this here. We have a Facebook page, again, trying to get more of a dialogue going, get more visibility in the community. The future activity, what we're sort of building for in the spring, is having a public exhibit and panel discussion sort of simultaneously that would be in a public space that would invite the public in, and that people can participate, either contribute to the exhibit of images of e-waste. And one of the ideas is the exhibit could focus on, people's images of their junk drawer e-waste or closet e-waste. and we're still thinking about who best to invite in to participate in this panel discussion. So some of our synergistic interdisciplinary activities, Professor Zanotti's Culture and Environment class focused very heavily on e-waste and contributed a lot to the project that way. There's also been synergy with an NSF integrated graduate education research training program on sustainable electronics at Purdue that was that's led by Professor Handwerker in materials engineering. Let me back up for just a second. And then the development of an application, a phone app using electronic devices to try to help solve the e-waste problem. Developing an app that people could use that would tell them where they can take their electronics when they're done with them to recyclers. And I've focused a lot on recyclers, but as the project, we're looking at this much more broadly, that we can't recycle our way out of this problem. So I'll just throw that out there. But that's something that Gideon Singer, a graduate student, has been working on with Nicole Kong, the GIS librarian. So what we've learned so far, okay, we're not through looking at the survey results, but a few quick things. 72 respondents are currently storing an unwanted electronic device in their home. 34% of respondents do not know anyone who can reuse, resell, or recycle used electronics. So there's definitely an information gap there. Lack of information regarding options. So why don't people recycle electronics? For one thing, it's easy not to, because it takes effort. You have to take it somewhere. You know, there's no infrastructure. Not that there is really in other places either. Data security concerns, this came up immediately and comes up continuously. Oscar Winsky will wipe clean your hard drives. That's part of their service. They're certified to do this. Not anybody can get certified to do this, and yet it's still a concern. People know it can be done, but the faith people have in this being adequately done is an issue. So there's no financial incentive. You take your electronic device, they won't pay you for it. So there's a lack of infrastructure, information for encouraging repair and reuse as well, and that's another thing that we're sort of working on. So policy implications, we're still working on this. There really is a need for national legislation, but that's going to be down the road until more people think that this is a problem worth addressing. Municipal infrastructure, that may seem sort of pie in the sky. That would be ideal. The real issue is how to incentivize consumers to reuse and recycle electronics, how to incentivize producers to take more responsibility, and producer responsibility is something that's happening that people are talking about, but also how to incentivize people to design devices to be more easily repaired and disassembled. There's a whole movement now, it's just new, it's happening, it's exciting, this movement of people demanding the right to be able to repair their stuff. It's really exciting. But education on the hazards of e-waste really needs to target youth, and it needs to start soon. And I'm going to sing a song, and if anybody else knows the words, sing along. Give a hoot, don't pollute, never be a dirty bird, in the city or in the wood, help keep America looking. Nobody else knows this, or really? This was just in Missouri? Like, I can't. So, anyway, we haven't come up with a song yet, but maybe we need one. Thank you. Oh, one last one. Thanks.
We have time for a few questions. I'll go ahead and ask one. Hopefully a lot of you got a chance to hear our keynote speaker last night, Nicholas Hahn, and he talked a lot about the future, being able to look ahead 5, 10, 15, 20 years on your topic. So for this grand challenge, where do you see the future of e-waste? And in terms of, you said we currently lack an infrastructure really to deal with that, but also possibly the manufacturing side of things.
Yeah, I guess that's where you can't really, it's difficult to envision innovation occurring within recycling because the things are already made and they're difficult to take apart. Although Fu Zhao on the project, he, working with students based on some of the earlier work that we did, he developed a tool that didn't previously exist that would be useful in taking apart LCD televisions, would decrease time. And so this is why e-waste gets shipped overseas. So we don't really deal with the burden for the most part. It's shipped overseas because of labor costs, because it's very time consuming to take electronic devices apart. And that's why you have it being disassembled in other countries in some cases in really bad conditions, bad for human health and bad for the environment. So we've largely escaped that. We've outsourced it, but I'm digressing from your question, I know. I don't know, I don't know if we can design our way out of it. I'm trying not to be pessimistic. So somebody develops a new phone next week that's easier to take apart. I mean, how many people then are just going to like drop their current phone and go buy that one? So it's a consumer mentality problem. Like we can't buy our way out of this problem. Ideally, devices will be made in a way that they could be more easily recyclable, and that will help. We still have to deal with all this stuff now, right? We still have to deal with the stuff that's being made and consumed right now. So I think in the design, and again, it's maybe I'm mentally not able to see that into the future. But one of the things he mentioned last night, he talked about dematerialization. And Gideon, a grad student on the project, was talking with me afterwards, and we've talked about how we don't think people use that word, or they don't really know what that word means, because dematerialization, you know, sure, you can carry around, you know, with your phone. I don't have it to hold up. I don't know where I put it. Anyway, a camera, a phone, video camera, all of these things, right? So that's dematerialization, except you're buying a new one every 2 or 3 years. And I think everybody should have this technology, but that's the problem, you know, because a few people used to have a TV or phone or video camera, and this has grown over time. And now everybody has this device. So the dematerialization, you know, I remember the digital age, we weren't going to have paper anymore. There was just going to be less stuff. And that's simply not true. There's just more and more stuff being constantly produced. Yes?
I have a question about the kind of responses that you've had to your study so far. For example, here at Purdue, talking to other engineers, as you've been doing in your project, what kind of response have you had from people who are at the design end and who may not have thought about the long-term consequences of this, because we're so geared toward the short-term profitability, entrepreneurial, the latest thing, planned obsolescence, whatever. I mean, have you found that this is a responsive audience for these kinds of concerns?
I think so. There's a lot more to do as far as integrating what we're doing with what engineers are doing, and that's really what makes this kind of work generally, from, you know, I won't speak for other projects, for this project, very difficult. Professor Handwerker's expertise is in lead-free solders. Fu Zhao's expertise is in life cycle analysis, and so again, we're looking at the same problem from different angles and trying to find ways to sort of put those together, because you know, the life cycle analysis, as I was pointing out, doesn't always look at, you know, the human factor, and so that's what we're trying to put in, understanding, you know, human behavior, how it relates to the problem, what could be targeted for change in human behavior, and that makes policy difficult, because if it's the top down, you know, you can make laws, but you know, you put laws on top of the problem, people won't necessarily respond to them. Like people that live in rural parts of Indiana, this is one thing that came out, or rural parts of the U.S. everywhere that don't have any waste management infrastructure. You know, I realize I've digressed some, but it's I don't have a lot to say specifically to that. I think people are responsive in a positive way, but it's frankly, it's just not easy to plug it in, what we're doing into it directly.
Yes, I was just wondering, in your research, have you found out any information about global best practices, especially in terms of recycling and disposal? I'm thinking of countries in Scandinavia or the Netherlands that tend to be ahead of the curve, and just wondering what you found.
Right. Well, like I said, that part of the research is ongoing. But for instance, in in places like Germany, when you go to buy like an appliance, people are thinking at that moment about what to do with it when they're done with it because they know they're on the hook to pay for disposal. That's not the way things work in the United States. And one of the things I've said repeatedly is that we essentially suffer from an embarrassment of riches when it comes to land. And so people don't really think that way. And yet, even though we have this land, we're still shipping our e-waste to other countries. So there are these kinds of practices that at least put greater responsibility on people to think about it early on rather than when they're done with it. And I think that that's generally good. Gideon, who had talked to people in Australia, they had some of the same problems that we have, and that people are still storing things in their houses, but generally people seem more open to other kinds of options that essentially it comes down to who's going to pay for it. And that's probably why there isn't federal level legislation. So I think there will be a number of good ideas from other places to look at or include when we start talking about policy in detail. But yes.
Your video mentioned the rare earth elements component of this problem. Does your group plan to discuss the U.S.'s and the Western world's dangerous dependence on rare earth element supplies from unstable regions such as China and Afghanistan?
Right. That's another issue. It's not the issue specifically we're attempting to address. It's just another problem with electronics that's on the front end. The fact that they've. But yeah, do you have a response?
Thank you. So I'm Carol Handworker. We are part of a national program called the Critical Materials Institute, and it's specifically looking at rare earth elements, increasing supply, developing substitutes, and using things more wisely. And that team overlaps with this team and also the IGERT team. So yes, we are looking at some of those in great detail with a larger group across the country, and it's a $20 million a year program. And we have about 600K worth of that each year across different disciplines.
I'm going to take the prerogative of asking the last question. What is in it for Oscar Wensky? What do they get from recycling? I mean, why would they even want to do it? Are they doing this as a contribution to the community?
No.
Is there a financial incentive for them, a benefit for them to be recycling those?
Yes, there is money to be made in metals recycling. The amount can fluctuate. That's another problem with recycling. One of the main problem from a recycler's perspective is that, well, like he said, their competition is the fact that people are holding on to these. If people got into the habit of recycling things as soon as they were done with them, and again, like I've said, recycling is just one piece of this issue. But then recyclers would have a steady supply. So recyclers, they're out there hustling to try to get people to bring things in. And I've seen television ads for Oscar Wensky. And so you're more likely, if you have lots of scrap metal, you're more likely to get money for that. For the electronics, they won't pay you for them because the profit margin is such that they can't pay people for electronics and make a profit with the current rate of recycling. Now, maybe that would change if people were recycling more steadily. And in fact, there are some things that you must pay to drop off. Older cathode TVs, microwave ovens, you have to pay to drop those off. And I know from talking with people at the Mosey that I spoke with one gentleman who, in discussing this, he was just irate at the idea that you would have to pay somebody to take your trash.
But I guess the question I need to follow up on is, then is Oscar Wensky sending these places to Bangladesh and other places to be recycled? Or are they
That's-
doing it here?
That's the problem. Legislation is such that currently there's a point at which transparency breaks down. So companies are rated, there are different levels of green ratings for how people run their businesses in recycling. But there is wiggle room. There are places where the transparency breaks down. And so one of the problems we're dealing with is that people want to do the right thing, but it isn't obvious. And so you can recycle it, and that seems like the right thing, and maybe it is. But at some level, there's no guarantee where your device is going to end up. And that's part of the problem.
Thank you.